Have you ever noticed that the moment that you start really liking somebody, you start to overthink text, you start to doubt yourself, you start to worry about what you're saying or how you're showing up? And I want you to know this isn't a confidence issue, this is a self trust issue. This is about you not knowing how to hear your own inner voice. And I want to talk about today how to start doing that and how to do that and hold that and be centered in that while you're in connection with other people, how to maintain that as you meet people so that you're not performing to be loved, but you are loved for exactly who you are and chosen for that. My name is Crystal Hoban, and I help singles attract their soulmate partner who chooses them, who texts back, who is able to love all parts of yourself because you have learned to love yourself first. So let's get into it. So, today I want to talk about being able to hear your own voice. I think that this is probably one of the hardest things to do in the world that we personally live in, right? There are distractions everywhere, constant scrolling, constant noise, constant things in our environment all of the time. And also this need to constantly be productive in doing things. And I also feel like this comes down to when we are constantly in relationship and interaction with people, we often can't hear ourselves unless we are intentional and we take the time to actually listen to our preferences, our interests, what we like, which for me personally is constantly changing. And I think that's probably true for most people, is those things are constantly changing for us. And so if you don't make the time to check into those things, to sit with yourself, to be with yourself, you don't actually know how you're shifting and changing over time. One of the things that I personally do on a regular basis is I do sit with myself in silence almost on a daily basis to kind of check in with myself. And I understand that that's not something that everybody has time for, everybody can do. But this topic is coming up for me because I talk a lot with clients about how when they're in relationship, they really just fall into whatever the other people want. They do whatever they want. They spend time in that way. They have the same preferences in that way. And there's not a lot of room that they give themselves to figure out what it is that they like or they want or what they prefer. And this is something that you have to be so intentional about realizing it and recognizing when it comes to yourself. And I guess that's why I make time on a daily basis for myself to do that. And some of the ways that I've done that in the past is through journaling, where now I'm much more, I guess, comfortable with silence. So that's the way that I kind of do it at this point in time. But I think that this stage is so important. And what's bringing this up for me is recently I was talking to a client who just went through a breakup. They just went through a separation and they're starting to relearn who they are. They're starting to learn how to listen to themselves again and listen to their voice again and listen to what they like and what they prefer and how they want to spend their time and starting to realize what their actual interests are. And it's been challenging for this person to say the least. And I think it is challenging for anybody, right? Because sometimes we'll decide to do something, we'll be like, oh, I love that, right? And then we actually hate it. I think that happens a lot more than not. And I think that the way that I've come to understand that is that's just information about what I don't like, which helps me to understand what I do like, right? And so sometimes I think when we have those experiences where we end up doing something and then we don't end up enjoying it, right? We are like, oh, well, what's the point? Why bother doing that again, right? Instead of seeing it as this like learning experience, this part of the journey, this part of the path, this part of remembering who you are and being able to hear who you are and what you actually do enjoy. That's all part of the process. You can't figure out what you like if you don't know what you don't like. And I think that I've noticed that a lot in the work that I do, where it's kind of like people are very aware of what they don't like, right? And that actually is what guides you and helps you recognize what it is you do prefer and what it is that you do like. And I think what becomes more difficult is that when we do take that time of self reflection, we do take that time away from people and figure those things out. How do we then be able to bring that back into relationships and connections without feeling like we need to collude or we need to fall in line or we need to just be whatever that person wants us to be? I think that's the harder part, right? But that process, that time where you're figuring yourself out, you're figuring out what it is that you enjoy and what you like, right, is so pivotal and important for you to be able to then take that information and integrate that into new relationships or relationships that you have, or to be able to speak those things to other people. But I think the real challenge then becomes, how do we do that when other people don't like the same things as us or don't prefer the same things as us, right? How do we still remain who we are in connection with other people? And this is a different level, I would say, of challenge. This is a different level of being able to trust yourself, being able to be confident, and being able to stand self-assured within who you are, and know that even if the other people don't agree with that or like that or don't prefer that, that doesn't matter. It's still okay for you to have those preferences and have those ideas for yourself. And I think, as an ex-people pleaser, that's really difficult. It's really hard to be able to be in a place where maybe you're not in agreement with somebody else or things are not completely on the same page and aligned. And that's been one of the bigger lessons that I have personally been experiencing in my life is, I did a lot of the people pleasing recovery. I figured out who I am. I hear my inner voice, right? All of those different things, because I spend the time to sit with myself and figure those things out, make the mistakes and learn from them, right? But then, when you are coming back into connection with people, how do you hold that steady, even when it's challenged by somebody else, or even when it doesn't align with someone else? And I'm feeling called to share that I grew up in a family, and even this client that I was thinking about this concept with recently grew up in families where agreement meant connection. If you believe the same things, then that was a way that you were connected to each other. It was a way of showing love. And I think that a lot of the time, that is how people pleasing kind of develops in our childhood in a lot of ways. And you don't always realize it, right, until you become an adult and you start seeing different things or you have different experiences. But this idea that if we are in agreement, then that's me showing love. That's how we connect with each other. And there's this kind of belief underneath there that if we're not in agreement, and let's say we don't agree on the same thing and we're not on the same page, then that will lead to disconnection. And I think I believed that for a really long time, that if I wasn't in agreement, if I wasn't easygoing, if I didn't just collude with whatever the other person wanted, right, that would mean I was disconnecting. It would lead to disconnection. We wouldn't like each other the same way or have the same connection, right? And I've had to come to terms to understand that that's actually not true. That's actually the highest form of being authentic. That's actually the highest form of letting yourself be seen. That's actually what leads to deeper intimacy and deeper connection with people. The ability to disagree and still care about each other and still respect and understand each other's perspective is a deeper level of intimacy. It's a deeper level of connection. It's not a threat to the connection. But I do believe that was something I thought and felt for a really long time because of how I was socialized and what I was brought up in. And I think that belief has kept me from fully being authentic, fully letting myself show up, letting myself disagree with things when I really felt like I wanted to, but being afraid that when I did, it would cause an issue, it would cause a problem, it would cause a conflict, right? So avoid that at all costs. you know? That's kind of what I grew up in. You avoid that at all costs because you don't want that, right? Because that will lead to disconnection because there was no way to disagree or have a difference in preference without it leading to a conflict or an issue. And part of the problem with that, for me personally, and I think this is true in a general, is that when we come from this perspective where we can only be connected when we agree with everything or we're on the same page when it comes to everything, there's this deeper belief that, you know, if we don't agree, then we can't respect each other's beliefs, right? Or there will be a lack of understanding of each other's differences. And that's because deep down, there's also this belief about someone has to be right and someone has to be wrong. And one thing that my spiritual journey has taught me is that no one is innately right and no one is innately wrong. We are either aligned in certain ways or we are not. And when you feel like you need to be right, that's when disagreement becomes disconnection. When you feel like there is only one way that is correct, that is when disagreement will always lead to disconnection. And so the bigger picture piece of this is, how do you disagree or have different preferences or different ideas and see that as being okay for each person and understand that? Be compassionate to that. Be open to that. Be open to understanding further where that's coming from for them, right? Rather than feeling like one person needs to be right and one person is wrong if they don't believe or experience those things the same way. Because when we can actually have that understanding and we can actually be curious about those things and we can disagree respectfully, that is when deeper connection and deeper intimacy can happen. And I just want to say that I know I keep saying intimacy. I don't mean just in a romantic sense. Intimacy is something that happens in all relationships. And the deepest form of intimacy happens when you let yourself be fully seen. And it's okay for you to do that, even if the person doesn't agree with you on a certain level about those things. And when you can fully let yourself be seen without feeling judged in that way, right? But just see that as we're all a little bit different. We all have our own ideas of how things should be, and no one is right or wrong. It opens up this whole new world of possibility of connection, of learning, of experiencing. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. I think a lot of the time, though, we're taught that that's a negative thing. And I think it can become negative when we can't do that in a respectful, kind, understanding type of way. And so the reason that I'm kind of thinking about all of these different things and talking about them is because I think it's important to recognize that we don't have to be 100% aligned with somebody to be connected to them. We don't have to be 100% in agreement with somebody to love them, right? Love, unconditional love, is being able to hold all parts of somebody else and respect all parts of somebody else, just like they respect all parts of you, even if they are not completely on the same page in regards to agreement. There's still a curiosity and understanding and a letting of somebody be who they are and letting that be okay, even if you don't agree or it's not your preference. And I think when you can take this way of thinking about things and this way of viewing things and this perspective, like when you can shift your perspective in this way, I think that actually is what opens up so many more deeper relationships and connections. And that's also how you are able to move through letting yourself be seen without that fear of judgment or that worry, right? One thing that I always talk about is that people meet you with how you meet them, right? So if you show up really guarded and not letting yourself fully be seen, you're not giving that other person permission to do that as well. Unconsciously, we all feel that from each other, But when you can show up authentically and vulnerably, right? You give permission for someone else to do that. And that deepens connections. Authenticity deepens connections. Compassion, understanding, curiosity, it deepens connections. We don't have to be in agreement about everything, but the way that we choose to disagree, the way that that looks matters. Can we do it in a respectful and kind way and recognize that there is no right way? We're just different. We're all different. And that's actually okay. And that's what makes us uniquely us. And when you build the self trust and the confidence to know who you are, to be certain of who you are, before you try to do that in relationship, it makes it a lot easier for you to be able to stand your ground and stay there without falling into whatever you think that person wants you to be, right? Or doing whatever it is you think they want you to do. That's how you stay centered within yourself while also being in relationship with other people. And there is definitely a perspective shift that has to happen here, and a shifting of certain beliefs that you have about how connection looks and your beliefs around what actually leads to disconnection. Because for a lot of us, that's what leads to conflict without us even realizing it. And a lot of those beliefs, right, are so deep and so ingrained that we don't even recognize that they're happening or playing out in our day to day lives. So I think it's really important to recognize that being able to hear your own inner voice, making time to do that, making time to hear yourself, making time to know who you are is so important before you go into a relationship with anybody. Because if you don't know that, then you will be colluding, you will be people pleasing, you will be kind of like altering yourself to fit what the other person wants because you're not solid in that first. And for you to be able to not abandon yourself in a relationship, that grounding and centeredness and solidifying is so important. And for you to be able to move into a relationship and maintain who you are and not lose yourself, that needs to be solid first. If this resonated with you, this is exactly the work that I help my clients do as a coach. I don't just help you with dating, I help you build the self trust and the confidence that you need so that you can stay tapped in and tuned into yourself and maintain connections that keep deep satisfaction, happiness, where others choose you just like you choose yourself. I help you attract that soulmate partner who loves all of you because you have learned to love all of you. You can find out more information at crystalclearmystic.com.